Hi there. In this lesson, we will be comparing tabular and graphical representation of data, or in other words, we will be comparing when to use tables and when to use charts and graphs. Now, let's first get started about what we know, regarding tabular representation so far, what we have learned about tabular representation so far. So what we learned was that in the Home tab, using the Format as Table option, we can format our data set to be sorted or structured as a table. Once that is done, we can use the different arrows on the headers to actually be able to sort the data, whether it is in ascending or descending order, whether we apply a text filter, whether we apply a number filter. The filtering in table is different in a sense that it's very specific in a sense that if we make sure that we do not want if we mention that we only want a particular kind of data to be presented to us, the rest of the data would be hidden. For example, instead of all the different regions here, I unselected it and I only want to view the data from the East region. I select that and I click OK. And all the rest of the rows, all the rest of the data entries have been hidden. Now this basically is better for us to quickly sort and visualize the data. It's easier, but it also leads us to a loss of data points. In order to deal with that loss, what we can do is use conditional formatting. Now what conditional formatting is, it can be accessed from the Home tab in the conditional formatting region. We've been over this in the previous section. What it does, it highlights the cells, it highlights the values that you're interested in while keeping the values that you are not interested in on the sheet as well. In this way, you are able to identify, you're able to understand the different patterns, the different trends, and you're able to visualize your information in a much better manner with more accuracy and precision. This was about tabular representation of data. We have been over the graphical representation of data as well, where you can insert a chart or a graph from the list based on your data set, your needs, and whatnot. Now the question arises, how do we know when to use tables or when to use charts? The idea is very simple. There are different factors to consider when choosing whether to use tables or graphs. Now the first factor to consider is the kind of data set that you have. When it comes to tabular representation, When it comes to raw data, tabular representation is much better suited, but when it comes to processed data, graphical representation is the way to go. Now what this means, let's go back to the data set that we originally had listed. A little introduction or background about this data set. This is a sales data about different items that were sold on a specific dates in the specific regions by specific sales representatives, and the cost and the total sale amount is listed here as well. Now when it comes to, I've already mentioned that this data has been structured in the form of a table. Now if I want to visualize it, if I want to understand some specific features, what I would do, what we have learned to do in the previous sections is that we'll go into conditional formatting, we'll select a rule, we'll select a limit, we'll select what we want to be highlighted, to be visualized, to be emphasized, and we'll just go ahead with it. For example, I want to know the top 10 purchase items or something. So I just go here, top bottom rules, and I want the top 10% of highlighted to be filled with red. And I have that data in front of me, and I can choose this for different sections. I can understand which relationship to set with others and whatnot. But the whole idea here to understand is that this is raw data. It has multiple entries, it may have duplicate entries, it may have different variables clashing with each other as well. This whole data is raw data. This is something that you can study in depth. You can go over it and go over the numbers and everything. But if I want to make a chart out of it, which I actually did show you earlier as well, if I just want to go ahead and make, let's say let's go for a trend chart. If I want to make a trend chart out of it, this is going to be a mess. Let me just zoom it, see if you can view this better. So you see, it has multiple entries. It has entries that are overlapping each other. There is a whole lot of mess here because the data is raw. We haven't yet identified what kind of relationship we want to discover between the different variables and what kind of output we're actually looking for. So this is officially a mess. Charts and graphs can only be used when it comes to process data. Let's maybe see what we mean by that. So when it comes to process data, let's say I decided that I want to understand that per each day, how many sales were made. I want to see that trend. So what I do is I go ahead and select this order date and I select this total purchase items, this total purchase value, and I go into the line chart because I want to see a trend in the data, how it's changing over time, how it's changing over the matter of days, and I choose a line chart. And see, this looks much better. Why? Because I went ahead and I chose what kind of data I was interested in. I chose the variables that I was interested in. I basically processed the data. Instead of using all the columns and everything and expecting it to magically look fine as it does in a table, I went ahead, I selected this specific, I picked the specific things that I was interested in, and I made a graph out of it. A graph which, is showing us a trend and which is logically understandable. So this is what we mean by working with processed and unprocessed data. When the data that you have is unprocessed, you go with a chart because it's easier to see the different fields, to work with the different fields, to filter and sort whatever you need. You have all the data in the world to work with. But when it comes to chart, you need to pick, you need to process and understand what you're actually looking for and then make a chart or a graph out of it. Another way to better understand how charts cannot work with unprocessed data would be if I selected the rep name and the total purchase name. And I want to see how much they each, sold, what was their sales data or something. And I go here and I want to do a comparison between the different reps, so I select a 2D chart. But see here, in this case, it's visible, it's obvious that, let me just change the color here, so that it's more, So see here, it's obvious that this data is not processed. Why? Because different names are being repeated over and over again. Why are they being repeated? Because they were already organized because of other parameters in respect to other parameters within the table. So these are being repeated. Jones is being repeated, Howard is being repeated, Kevin is being repeated, Lisa is being repeated. So the rep names are being repeated and their costs are being repeated. They ideally, if let's say Kevin made the sales that Kevin made over an entire year, they should have been added and then shown in the graph. But that didn't happen because we already did not pre-process the data. This was raw data, and so the graph that we have right now is pretty much useless. So you need to understand what kind of data you can work with, how to process it before you can actually make a graph out of it. So this graph does not work, but the other one, the one with this trend, worked because there was no repetition in here. So this is basically how unprocessed data works, and it's a matter of understanding logically, fixing up the values. The second option, the second comparison, the second factor to consider when making the choice between tabular and graphical representation is the goal. If you're looking to analyze in depth, if you're looking to work with the specific numbers, if you're looking to, get the accuracy, be able to properly sit down and evaluate and interpret the data based on the numerical values that are given to you, then a tabular representation is a way to go. But if you're looking for generalizations or summaries or patterns and trends, if you just want the data to be smoothed over to give you a quick idea of what's actually going on there, then charts and graphs are the way to go. This is pretty much self-explanatory, in a way that if I want to go into detail about the kind of sales that was made, how many units were sold, and which item is more popular, and like which price point did the price points increase. For example, an item was 19.99 at first, but now it's 19.45. So these are the numbers. If I'm working with that much specifics, that much accuracy, I need tables. But if I just want to see that, just tell me which item was the most popular one, which item sold the most, which item was least popular, then that is a trend that I can, I'm not focused on whether that item sold 1,000 units or whether it sold 2,000. All I'm interested in is that it sold the most. So that is a kind of data, that is a kind of goal. If that's the kind of goal that I have, graph is the way to go. Now moving on to the third factor. The third factor is the limitations. Now I've actually mentioned this before as well. So, when it comes to charts and graphs, when it comes to tables, you can work with different variables. You can have multi-variable, multi-dimensional data. For example, we have the different columns here. We have different values. We can have different relationships between each of these. But when it comes to graph, you are kind of limited in the amount of variables that you can use and the amount of variables that you can draw a logical relationship between to show up in patterns and trends. What this means is, it's a very simple way to go with it. So like I said, multiple columns, meaning multiple variables, multiple relationships can be established. What if I want to see what was the cost of the items sold in each region? What if I want to see on which date items were sold to what region, or on which date was which sales representative most active? So I have multiple options here to choose. I have multiple variables here to choose from, and that is easily done when it's through a table, because everything's here. It's raw data, it's unprocessed data. I can work with whatever I want. But when it comes to charts, I have the axis limiting me. I have the x-axis, I have the y-axis. I can have other axes in between. I can have other relationships in between as well when it comes to, bar charts, when I can compare different values and everything. But they would still be a limitation. I cannot deal with all the different variables within a single graph. I'll have to make a choice. I'll have to prioritize which variable I want to use and which I don't. This does not in any way mean that I can only use 2 variables. I can use more than 2. I can use other relationships. I can establish different relationships as well. But there's still a limitation. I can not go for a whole lot more, because that would just complicate the graph, and we'll end up with something that we didn't even want in the first place, something that does not even make any sense at all. So now, this is about the third factor. Now, when it comes to the fourth factor is the audience. Like I mentioned before, if you're looking for in-depth analysis, if you're looking for specifics, tabular representation is the way to go. But if you need a quick viewing to understand what's actually going on, just a brief glimpse of what's going on, then graphical representation is the way to go. The last factor is the format, or the media, what's the publishing format that you're using. For example, in research, mostly when it comes to printed media. If you have a report, if you have a if you want to give a detailed report in printed form or in a tabular form, you basically go for tables. But when it comes to for example, you've seen social media ads, right? For example, when it comes to social media ads or presentation slides or something, you use charts. A pie chart is very much common when using digital media to show different trends, or actually all of these, line chart, bar chart, pie chart, these are very common in digital media. When it comes to running ads or showing sales data over time, it's more visually appealing, and it's quick to understand, it's quick to grasp. But if you want detailed, if you want a proper book report, if you want a proper research report, you go for a tabular representation of data. I mean, you've never seen a data with, like this kind of data expressed in a presentation, have you? What we do is we use charts and graphs because that's easier, that's appealing, that's simpler. So this is basically a comparison between when to use tables, when to use graphs, and it's pretty simple once you have the idea of what you want, what you're working with, what you're going for, and what kind of audience you have. So this is it for this one. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.